You just spotted Cletus snacking and texting rather than connecting dots with customers. What are you going to do? What's the first idea that pops into your head? Write it down. Now, just a quick inventory. How many of you began with a 2x4? Maybe got that? So motivation clearly seems to be lacking. Perhaps that's one of the things to address. I want you to notice what your reflex would be, because that's your theory of behavior. If your theory of behavior is compulsion, giving orders, threats, that's a theory of behavior. That's a particular source of influence. What's yours? So here's the big idea that I hope that you'll take away. Influencers succeed where the rest of us fail because they do that. They overdetermine success. This is so contrary to what you and I do. You and I tend to underdetermine success. You and I tend to try to ask, what is the least I need to do to get that person to change? What's the one thing I need to do to get them to change? We have this minimalist, this unitary, this single bullet idea that one thing will propel change. Let's just redesign the performance management system. Let's restructure. Let's roll out training. What's the one thing we have to do? What influencers do differently than the rest of us is they marshal a critical mass of all 6 sources of influence. It turns out that's how many unique sources there are. There are 6 reasons you and I do what we do. If Cletus is snacking and texting, there are probably 6 reasons he's doing it. Let's take these each in turn. Here's the first problem you have to solve. There are 6 problems you have to solve. The first is the influence of the pain or pleasure of the behavior itself. You and I know this one. We know it's more fun to eat dessert than not eat dessert. That's why we eat dessert. Chocolate is yummy. It's pleasurable. Not eating chocolate is painful for some of us. And so the first problem we've got to solve is that many of the positive behaviors you and I are trying to foster are boring, frightening, uncomfortable, painful. So if you're asking somebody to go out and greet and deal with customers, that takes more energy and effort. It just isn't fun. The contrary problem is that many bad behaviors feel pretty good. So that's what you're up against. And the question we put to you is, if you're trying to create good hand hygiene in a hospital or great customer service in a restaurant chain, how do you compensate for that? How do you compensate for the fact that people just don't want to do it? And the very problem we have, the very reason you and I fail at influence is because we do what I just described. We compensate. We don't solve the problem, we compensate for the problem. So let's go back to Cletus for just a second. One of the questions you have to ask yourself as an influencer is, why is he not personally motivated? Why does he not want to do this? Is it because of moral defect? Is it because he's just lazy or self-centered? Influencers almost never conclude that. Or is it because of moral slumber? This is the direction influencers typically go. Is it not because he's a bad person, but because in the moment he's not thinking about good behavior? And if so, how would I solve that problem? So what do influencers do? They understand that you and I spend most of our lives morally disengaged. We're unconscious of the profound moral and human implications of our actions. Why does AIDS spread itself? Because in the moment that people act in a way that propagates that virus, they're unconscious of the moral implications of that choice. The question for us as influencers is how do you make them conscious of that?